wasn't going to be on the Ravens, but I know it's been a Terps month around here, and I've obviously been keeping up with everything from halfway around the world. They've sort of fallen, and I don't know whether they're going to get up or not, but this has been an ugly little couple of weeks since I left. I leave, and Turgeon goes to hell in a handbasket. What happened here, Luke?
Yeah, well, the calendar turned to February. That's really what happened for the Terps, and it's
same as last year, kind of, sort of, right?
Yeah, and I think for people that have been critical of Mark Turgeon, it's something that has been a little bit of a theme here, and certainly this team. First of all, they started 20-2. I think anyone, even your most optimistic Terps fan, wasn't expecting that kind of a start when you're starting.
That wasn't going to hold, right?
Yeah, you lose the amount of talent that they had last year, regardless of whether they put it all together and whether a Sweet 16 was good enough for that team on paper. They still lost substantial talent there, and Melo Trimble comes back after testing the NBA waters, and people weren't sure what to expect. I think a lot of people were saying, "Hey, this team makes the NCAA tournament. That's great." Whether it's a 7 seed or an 8 seed, 9 seed, 10 seed, somewhere in that range, I think that's where most people, being realistic, figured that this team would be. If these freshmen were as talented as everyone was saying that they were. They're 20-2. You're starting to think, wow, this team, Sweet 16. If things go right and they get a good draw, it's maybe a little better than that. Who knows? And certainly the future's looking bright. Well, I think the future looks no less bright than it did a month ago. But as far as right now, definitely some concerns with how this basketball team's playing. And
well, they're not just losing; they're not competing to some degree, right?
Well, the Iowa game. You look at their okay, we go back to the start of February. They lost to Purdue. They lost at Penn State, ugly loss at Penn State. But, hey, to that point, that team had played so well on the road, you're willing to forgive it to an extent.
Everybody has one bad one, right?
Yeah,
Last year was the Minnesota game, and you say, well, Rutgers, Penn State, Minnesota, they're going to win a game or two here or again. Minnesota's better than that this year. But, yeah, even the bad teams steal one. You don't want to be the one that loses to the Browns, but, they did,
Sure, and it happens, and it's not, you don't like it, but it's not something to necessarily be up in arms about. But now you look at, they've lost 3 in a row. As I said at the time, the Wisconsin loss, they played so well in the first half. Second half, Wisconsin really took it to them. Melo Trimble didn't get enough help. He was sensational. Coming off the Northwestern game where he had a career-high 32 points, was really, really good against Wisconsin. He didn't have anyone else that stepped up to play with him. I think we've seen the 3 freshmen, probably some fatigue setting in. These guys haven't gone through a full college basketball major conference schedule like this, and it's not an excuse, but I think there's some reality that sets in there that maybe these guys aren't quite ready to be as big time as we thought, and that's not to say they won't be in the next couple years, but you are concerned then for the rest of the way. But they come home, they played against Minnesota. Minnesota, by the way, I think is a good team. The Maryland game had been their 6th straight win. They hadn't lost since the Maryland win at Minnesota when you and I were getting ready to go to Houston for the week. But then the Iowa game comes, and Saturday was just ugly. Iowa played well. That's fine. Give them a little bit of credit here and there. Certainly Jordan Bohannon with his shooting, their shooting in general. Tyler Cook had a big game, but that was as listless of a performance I've seen from a Mark Turgeon team, really from, and talking to even some media folks who've covered the Terps, for the duration of Xfinity Center that it's been open. That's about as lifeless of a performance as you've seen, other than, look, Duke in the past, if a juggernaut comes in and beats them, then you kind of live with that. But this was a 500 Iowa team in a very mediocre Big Ten conference this year, and Maryland lost by 14 points, and it wasn't even that close, Nestor. It was as listless, as disappointing, as a go-through-the-motions kind of a performance as I've seen from this team all year. And, they've had some other losses that certainly were disappointing. The collapse against Nebraska comes to mind, and, even though Pitt's playing in a tough ACC, but certainly Pitt not a very good team this year. So they've had some other losses even at home where you'd kind of scratch your head and say, wow, that was pretty bad. But that Iowa game, beyond the first 10 minutes, Maryland wasn't all that competitive, really. And this is just a team that completely kicked their butts. And, that's concerning. 3 straight losses, and talking about a team that was 20-2, and now, and look, that's not to say I don't think they're going to make the NCAA tournament. Before Saturday's game, I think most of the bracketologists, I know Joe Lunardi at ESPN still had them as a 7 seed. So I don't think this is a case where they're going to miss the NCAA tournament, but
they could. They could. It's now. Look, man, I got on a plane and flew halfway around the world. I didn't think there was any chance that they weren't going to make the tournament. I thought the Big Ten tournament was sort of rudimentary. I don't know, dude. If they get bounced out first day in the tournament, they don't win again.
Okay, but at the same time, take a look at all the bracketology and look at the teams that are making it in at the end. The one thing you got to remember with this, and look, I'm as concerned about this team as anyone, but you got to look at what other teams are doing. And I think, and look, I'm not a
22-10 would get them in. Literally, if they lose the next 3, they get into 22-10.
Well, tell me what everyone else is doing. I mean, I can tell you right now, the last 4 in that Joe Lunardi had for his bracketology that he did, I guess it was Friday. So, things have certainly changed somewhat on that landscape. But talking about teams like Seton Hall, Illinois State, Georgia Tech, TCU, I mean, these are not impressive teams. Michigan State toward the end of that, USC, California, Marquette. I mean,
well, the whole Big Ten's not improve, right? So if you're looking for big wins by the Terps at this point,
no doubt. But I think overall, you just look at the teams that I just rolled off. Those aren't teams that you're looking at their resume and saying, "Wow, those teams look way better than Maryland, or even as good as Maryland." So I still am inclined to say that they're going to get in. But the fact that we're even having this discussion right now
is disturbing.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, they were 20-2 a month ago. So that's not me making any excuses for them. That's just me acknowledging that, hey, NCAA tournament bids don't occur in a vacuum unless you win your conference tournament. But as far as that large selections,
somebody's going to win the tournament, right? I mean, that's the other part of this is as bad as most of the teams have played, someone is going to go down to D.C. and steal the tournament, and it's not going to be because 3 teams are in the top 10 like maybe last year. That's not going to be part of the program here. That's not going to be – I mean, look, Iowa had a little juice at some point. Minnesota had some juice at some point. I mean, there was a lot of hope at Michigan, and certainly Michigan State, there's always hope. But
Indiana was
oh, my God, Indiana. I forgot about that.
Terrible this year.
Yeah. So, there's trouble all the way around for the conference.
Sure.
So why do you think that is? I mean, I think that's going to be a larger discussion here over the next 2 weeks as we lead up to the Big Ten tournament is what happened, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just, and I know the number will end up being okay as far as the number of teams that make it. I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 probably. But at the same time, it is a down year for this conference. And we saw this in Maryland's last 10 years or so in the ACC, even years where Maryland wasn't very good. There were some years where the ACC, despite its reputation, despite having Duke and North Carolina in it, and some of the teams that have been added that have been that have certainly improved the cachet of that conference, there are years you're just going to the ebbs and flows of college basketball from year to year. You have a great number of players that graduate from a conference that the overall quality ends up not being there. I mean, is there something specific that I pinpoint? Probably not, other than just to say that you do look at some teams that lost some talent, and Indiana. I mean, even Wisconsin. It just kind of goes through, and some of these teams don't have some of the guys that they had over the last couple of years, and that takes a toll. So. I think overall, though, it is a down year for the conference. There's no doubt about that, and that's what makes this concerning. As much as we looked at this young team from Maryland and said, wow, these guys are pretty good. We were saying this back in November and December and January that they were pretty good. We said all along we didn't know exactly how good because the non-conference schedule wasn't very good. We knew the Big Ten hadn't been particularly good. But we were pretty convinced that they were, you're 20-2, you're doing something right. But and we thought.
Well, what they were doing right was winning games at the end of the game, right? Literally.
Well, there's that, and the thing we thought we were going to say with the youth of this team is these guys should be better as the year goes on. And Instead, they're really wilting here. So, they've lost 5 of 7, and some of those losses haven't exactly been, it's no shame losing at Wisconsin. The Minnesota game was ugly, but Minnesota had been playing pretty good basketball, so I'm not going to flip out about that one if that's the only loss you're talking about, but it's the buildup of this. It's losing 5 of 7 since the start of February, and you look at this over the next next few games that they have. At Rutgers, that shouldn't be an issue. But I'll say this: the way Maryland played against Iowa, nothing's assured. The way they played against Iowa, I'd be worried about them going to Rutgers playing the same way. So you have that, and then the home game against Michigan State to close out the regular season. You want to try to build some momentum here. You want to hold on to a double bye in the Big Ten tournament, no doubt, and that's in jeopardy now. So this Maryland team needs to wake up. I don't know.
They needed me to come back to the continent, at least to the hemisphere.
Maybe just being back in the 48 states will do the trick. But
I'll throw Bino a text.
yeah, right. But with I don't know if it's fatigue. I don't know if it's
Well, let's talk about the players. Let's talk about individually what's happened. Jackson's the interesting guy to me. I'm a Herter guy. I'm a Trimble guy at any point at the end of a game. Jackson was the guy I think that was going to come along, much like last year. We looked at Carter, we looked at Suleiman, and look, we're talking about a kid here from another country, talking about a kid that's a freshman, talking about a young kid here that had that really flashed a lot of promise. I thought back in November and December leading up to the Big Ten. He has not been a factor guy for a long, long time now, going back a month. He had one good game back in January. Ohio State, I don't remember what game it was. It was 7-8 weeks ago at this point. Where is he in all of this? Because he was a guy for me that had to emerge, that you saw that flashes of, hey, maybe this kid's going to be the star in all of this by the time it's over with. Now, again, I'm judging that 10, 12, 14 games in after, they're playing, whoever the Little Sisters of the Poor were earlier in the season, sure. Where he looked like he could be a dominant player against Stony Brook or Howard or whatever. But he's sort of gotten lost in the shuffle a little bit, right?
Well, it's kind of been the case for all three of their freshmen. Justin Jackson, I don't think anyone denies the talent that he has. 6'7", 225, has long arms that makes him, when he wants to. And I think, some physicality, some toughness, probably getting some strength in the off season going into a sophomore season will make a difference. But you just look at his performance. He's just not shooting the ball nearly as well. He's had some 1 for 5, some 1 for 7s. He was 3 for 7 against Iowa, 4 for 10 from the field against Minnesota. Remember, Minnesota, that was the big game he had where he was 5 for 5 from beyond the arc. Followed that up, played well against Ohio State. And since then, he's only had, of this 7-game stretch, he's only had 2 games where he's hit double digits. And one of those was a 10-point performance in the loss to Minnesota. So I'm inclined to think there's fatigue setting in. These are freshmen who haven't gone through this kind of schedule, and like I said, it's not an excuse, but that's my best explanation. We saw the ability. He played extremely well the first month of Big Ten action.
Well, that's got to be the hard part for Turgeon. You see the ability, and then how do you get it out of him once the lights go on? And that clearly has been an issue, I guess, for a lot of these kids at this point, and Trimble especially, because the stock, this was the year for him to rise his stock as an NBA player, and part of that was how are you going to shoot at the end, but you have to be in the games to be the guy in the last 4 minutes. They haven't been in the games to give themselves a chance to win this month, right?
Well, they've been in, a couple of these games they've still had chances, no doubt, but, certainly not against Iowa, but, with Melo Trimble, and this is going to be something that is interesting to watch to see how this unfolds. The Wisconsin game, he played extremely well, and Mark Turgeon sat him for the final 4 minutes. And at the right after the game, he talked about the fact that he thought there was some fatigue. Trimble had missed the front end of a 1-on-1, was missing some free throws as the second half was progressing, and I think there was some validity to that. I think he was looking tired, but at the same time. Then a couple days later, he was asked about it again, and he talked about his disenchantment with his team not rebounding. And he he looped Melo Trimble in there with a couple other guys that he sat at the end of the game. Well, Trimble was coming off of the 32-point game against Northwestern. He was the only reason that they were still in it with 5 minutes to go against Wisconsin. Not that they were on the cusp of winning, but he was the biggest reason why they had a lead at halftime and why they played really well the first 20, 25 minutes of that game.
Well, they were awful, on the offensive boards in that game, right?
Oh, yeah, right, exactly. But since that benching or rest or whatever you want to call that, Mark Turgeon, said part of it was rest, part of it was rebounding, and it was clear he at least implied he was trying to send a message, not so much to just Trimble, but the entire team. Well, you've seen what's happened since then. They lost at Minnesota to Minnesota by 14 points at home, and then they got their butt kicked by Iowa, and Melo Trimble has been woeful these last 2 games, after his 2 best games of the season. So there's a pretty interesting correlation there as far as him at least partially being benched.
Well, that was part of the deal last year with him was the emotion, right? We talked so much about the legs and, he wasn't hitting shots and he was injured. But part of it was, where is his makeup when the water gets choppy, right? That was the question, because 3 years ago, he was just lights out. He was just the best player on the floor, and it flashed such incredible hope. First off, the thought was if he's going to be that good, he won't be around long, right? So I think 2 years ago we were looking at him and saying he probably won't be here in March of 17. He is. And part of that is that sort of ability to, brush it off and have a little amnesia and make what happens tomorrow better than what happened yesterday. He struggled with that last March, big time, February and March, really.
Well, and I still hold true that I don't think he was healthy, and I think that,
I agree with that, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, the hamstring was an issue for him. I think the lower back was an issue for him, and I think there were certainly some chemistry issues with, not so much that the guys didn't get along, but you had individuals that were hired guns on this team. I think Rashid Suleiman fit in well, but certainly you can question about Diamond Stone, and certainly you can question about Robert Carter as far as what were these guys focused on? Was it winning?
Well, then you also had Layman, who had been there the whole time and had to sort of, he and Melo were the original foundation guy, and Don, and all of those guys got sort of relegated to some degree last year, and that was the hardest part. Is Turgeon's got to manage the egos of 19-year-old children, right?
Yeah. So I mean, to compare it to last year, I mean, I don't think the ego is an issue here, but I do kind of question why Melo Trimble was sitting at the end of the Wisconsin game. If it was because of fatigue, fine, but then don't start talking about the team's lack of rebounding and being ticked off about that. And
he's got 3 days to rest.
Trimble had 3 days at this point in the season. I mean, I don't know how much of that I bought as far as it being rest. I mean, Trimble was missing some free throws toward the end of that game, but he was 9 of 17 and had 27 points. I mean, he was the reason why they were still in that game.
Yeah, he was going to be the only one who was really going to give you a chance to win the game. I mean, you weren't expecting DeMonte Dodd to take over.
Right. So this whole thing, and it wasn't just Trimble who was sitting. Some of the other starters were sitting as well. If Mark Turgeon was trying to send a message, well, I don't like how his teams responded to that message.
Well, it's certainly sending the message on the road at Wisconsin, right? I mean, it's a whole different deal. You're playing a top 25 team. This is a difference maker if you can pull that game off. It changes everything about the last month of how you've played, right?
No doubt. So, I mean, it's just the last week or so has just been weird. And all I know is Trimble was sensational, as good as he's ever been against Northwestern, was 12 of 17 from the field, had 32 points, followed that up with a really good game at Wisconsin. Not quite as good, and I get it. He missed a couple free throws, and you don't like seeing that. And
by the way, that was a hell of a road win against Northwestern. I mean, stuck in the middle of this, if we're going to talk about the stuff that's happened since I've been gone, I saw that, and I remember where I was when that game was being played because I was sort of following along. I happened to be online at that period of time, and I thought, this would be a nice win for them on the road at Northwestern. They were coming on. They're a pretty good team back in January.
And that was the game that made you think, they're fine. They had the hiccups against Purdue and at Penn State. They're fine because they'd beaten Ohio State at home, and then they go to Northwestern. And look, I know Northwestern's history, but I still think that's a a decent basketball team. Certainly a lot better than they've been for as long as I can remember. But then they follow it up, and you lose at Wisconsin. Okay, even with the benching at the end of the game, that was kind of weird. They lost to Wisconsin. It's not like there's too much shame in that, but it's just kind of snowballed from there. And look, Minnesota's pretty good, but there's no way you should lose by 14 points to that team at home. I mean, that's just unacceptable. And then you follow it up by laying a complete you-know-what against Iowa, a team that's just been middling.
Well, and the worst part, too, is all the excitement for the program that was building through 22-4 and 20-2 and all of that stuff. The last two games, it's been a scene down there, right? I mean, people get down there, they're parked. It's been all over my Facebook. People taking their kids down there, getting into Maryland, for the first time in a long time for some folks.
They had the 2002 celebration there on Saturday, which was fun. That was the only redeeming quality of Saturday's game, having the 2002 team back, and you see how they played for him.
Did you tell Mouton I still love him?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But you're right. I mean, and look, Mark Turgeon, after the first few years being as rocky as they were, it's clear that they've had some success now. They made the Sweet 16 for the first time since '03 last year, but at the same time, this is a talented team, and I think the future's still bright. I mean, you still have these three freshmen who, whether they've hit the wall right now, I still think the future's bright with those guys. And whether they recover to make a run for the NCAA tournament and win a game or two and finish off the year on a high note, who knows? At this point, I'm not feeling great about that possibility, but I still think these guys are a really impressive core that's going to be really good moving forward. But you do have to ask, after what happened last year when you had a team that was, lots of people thought they were the best team in the country at a couple different points, or at least were in that conversation, certainly. And to see them wilt the way they did down the stretch and end up having a little bit of a lower seed, and they still made the NCAA tournament to their credit and still made the Sweet 16. That was still kind of we talked about whether it was successful or not, and just the fact that they really wilted down the stretch, and now that it's happening again with a really different group overall. I mean, still Trimble, still DeMonte Dodd, still Jalen Brantley, still Jared Nickens, although his role is certainly different than it was a couple years ago, but it's still, the common theme is this team's getting worse, not better, and that's something where you do ask about
And that's
coaching.
a trend. That's 2 for 2 now,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, is it Turgeon's in-game coaching? Is he working his players too hard that they're wearing down and, working too hard in practice, maybe not working smart enough?
Are we still at the point, by the way, Luke, where we're going to judge the whole thing on the end? Because that's the way it always works, right? If they somehow win a game or two in the Big Ten, they somehow get in the tournament and take a facer in the first game as a 10 seed or something, losing to a 7 or something like that. Let's just say, if they go out in the first round of the tournament, that's trouble for Turgeon. I mean, I think we all looked up when they were 22-4 and said, well, maybe they'll get to the 16 this year. They certainly should be playing in the 32. I think you do get judged once the brackets come out. You got to win a couple of games there, or the whole season's a mess. I mean, and they can right this ship and get to the 8 for crying out loud 3 weeks from now. But it certainly doesn't look like it's trending in that direction.
Yeah, I wouldn't think that, but...
you either get to the 32, the 16, or you get left at home, or, as I've been seeing on my timeline, NIT, right?
Yeah, I'm still not buying that just yet. I just, again, it's real easy to just look at a team in a vacuum and say, well, they're not NCAA tournament worthy. They got to take 68 teams, I mean, and Maryland's profile, even with having lost 5 of 7, is still better than a lot of the teams they're talking about on the bubble right now. So I'm still not convinced of that. Now, if they lose at Rutgers and they get blown out by Michigan State and they lose their first Big Ten tournament game, then we'll talk, and then we'll see what everyone else is doing at that point, and then it becomes a far more interesting question. But, getting back to what you said, I still think it goes back to how real you thought them being 20-2 was in terms of, yes, they were good. Bad teams or just mediocre teams don't make it to 20-2, But at the same time, we can go down the list and go down the schedule and say, what were their great wins there? And you kind of scratch your head and say, well, there were some okay wins here and there, but they weren't playing top 25 teams, and they weren't piling up those victories. So I think you look at it in its totality and say, it's a young team, probably overachieved, probably weren't ever truly as good as a 20-2 record would indicate, and to some degree, and that's not to excuse these guys, it's just to maybe assess them more realistically than we maybe thought they were, as far as maybe thought they were a lot better. And maybe we're seeing market correction here. Maybe we're seeing, well, this is a solid team. Certainly a lot to be encouraged about because they have 3 freshmen. But maybe we're seeing here over these last 3.5, 4 weeks that 20-2 might have been way more mirage than anyone was hoping. But you still get to the tournament, win a game in the tournament, at least make the round of 32. Considering what they lost and considering the youth that they had, I wouldn't say that's a rousing success after they were 20-2, but I wouldn't look at it as being a colossal failure either, I guess I'm saying.
He is Luke Jones. He has been covering the Terps all year long. I am back from the other side of the world, and the NFL Combine going on in Indianapolis. Terps taking on Rutgers up in the swamps of Jersey. Then, of course, Michigan State this weekend. Luke will be on the scene for that. Of course, you can find him at Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. I'm back. Nasty at WNST.net will find me. We'll continue to talk some Terps around here this week, go through the Big Ten, certainly the Orioles at spring training, as well as the Ravens and the post-fallout of the Matt Elam fiasco. I don't know what the whole Matt Elam thing was a fiasco. But we're going to talk some more Terps, some Orioles, even going to get Eddie Frankovic with some Caps, get some Wizards in here as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. We're on Facebook streaming live. We're out on YouTube on our WNSTV channel, as well as out on Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, and anywhere the internet travels, as well as in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Our tech service is still the best thing we do. It's how I learned about Matt Elam when I landed. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford at Security Boulevard, and Dennis will be here on Thursday. He's no more happy about the Terps than you and I are at this point as well. And it's Combine weeks. That's always fun for Dennis to get into the draft here, and I'm sure he'll do that on Thursday as we will join him as well. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. It's good to be back, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.